بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. أسأل الله تبارك وتعالى أن يجعل نياتنا خالصة لوجهه الكريم. I praise Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. I thank Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. I ask Allah to raise the rank and the honor and the esteem and the status of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, his family, his companions, and all those who follow them in excellence until the day of judgment. And I ask Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala to grant us the sincere intention. Wa alaikum salam to everyone who gave the salams. So I want to start today's lesson by reminding you of something. That whenever, and I told you this before, so that's why it's a reminder. Whenever you study Islam, you need to study it historically and globally from two aspects. Whenever you study in any science, so we're talking about the science of Aqidah, right? Whenever you study it generation to generation, all the way back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You want to try your best to maintain a continuous link between yourself and Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to the best of your ability. The second thing is you want to take that historic view globally. So everywhere there are Muslims in the past and in the present, you want to try to find out how they feel, how they believe, how they think, how they practice the religion. If you are successful at that, it is a means among several means to make sure you don't have a belief or a practice that's inconsistent with the Muslim nation, that therefore would be inconsistent with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's way. If we're going to study, all of us, what would help all of us, especially in these areas, is to not consider any contemporary scholar as an authority in what we're trying to accomplish. Do I mean they're not significant? Do I mean we don't honor scholars? No. But what happens, the scholar, contemporary scholar, if we stand too close to him or her, he or she would become a tree that blocks you from seeing the forest. I repeat, when we concentrate on any contemporary scholar to the exclusion of this vast historic and global tradition, the similitude of that is like standing too close to a tree, and by being so close to that tree, you're not able to see the forest. So when I say we're not going to pay attention to any contemporary scholar in terms of determining what is the truth, we're going to try to determine the truth by this historic and global view of our deen. And then every contemporary scholar, we're going to place them in that context. Is everyone following where I'm at here? And I'm going to take it slow, because if we don't get these basic concepts, as I start throwing more at you or giving you more, you're going to lose it. And some will catch it and some won't. And my idea is that most of us, if not all of us, catch it, not just a few of us. My objective is to reach everybody, not just certain group of us. So I want to go in a way that we all understand. So as I said, we mentioned certain scholars of the past because those scholars were the main references for the different convictions that we have among us as Muslims. In our context, the primary differences are between the Ash'aris and Maturidis and the Wahhabiyya, who call themselves Salafiyya. So if I put it, Al-Ash'ariyya, I'm sorry. The context of what I'm talking about in this area of the creed that we are dealing with presently is Al-Ash'ariyya wal-Maturidiyya, as opposed to Al-Wahhabiyya as-Salafiyya. And distinguishing between these two creeds, because that's what, in our context, we're faced with. There are other creeds, there are other factions among the Islamic sections, those who claim Islam and have different groups. And I want to explain something to you. Within these factions, these groups, Al-Ash'ariyya and Maturidiyya, right? There are a bunch of subgroups that claim to be Ash'ari and Maturidi that don't agree. Do you understand this? Contemporary, I'm talking about. So there are contemporary subgroups that say we are Ash'ari or we are Maturidi, in which there are other Ash'aris and Maturidis who don't agree with the way they do things. Is this clear? Likewise, you have within Al-Wahhabiyya, Salafiyya, subgroups that all claim to follow that way that don't agree with one another. Are we clear with that? Everybody with me? Any questions about what I said? So just in general, at this, while I'm talking, if you have a question about what I'm saying, you can put the question. Please don't distract me with nothing else. I'm not going to answer you. If it has exactly to do with what I'm talking about, I'm going to answer. I'm going to warn you ahead of time for those who like to give me their thoughts. I'm not interested in your thought. I just want to know if you follow what I'm saying. If you don't, I'll clarify that. If you have your own opinion, that's fine. I'm not, right now, and it's not what I'm interested in, nor what I'm discussing. So what I said, I'll repeat that, Abu Muhammad. We have Ash'aris and Maturidiyya. That's the historic, global madhab that we say is Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, right? Contemporary, we have groups, among many contemporary groups all around the world, who say we are Ash'ari or Maturidi. And other people, contemporary to groups, there's subgroups that say, I'm Ash'ari, but we don't agree with them. And then there's Ash'ari say, we don't agree with them. You follow? But they all say, I'm Ash'ari or Maturidi. I'm talking about contemporary groups. Likewise, if you look at Al-Wahhabiyya, who are known to us contemporarily as Salafiyya. Among those who call themselves as Salafiyya are subgroups who don't agree with one another. That's the point. Are y'all with me? So if you build your discussion on contemporary subgroups, you're going to miss the mark. That's the point. That's why I'm mentioning. So for instance, if I take Al-Ash'ariyya or Al-Maturidiyya and build my understanding of that based on contemporary groups, it's going to get cloudy. It's not going to be clear. Likewise, if I want to talk about the Ash'ari or Maturidi madhab, I have to go to the well-known scholars of the past of that school and then compare what contemporary people say according to them. Same thing with as-Salafiyya, or those who say they follow that way. If I'm going to talk about them, I can't pay attention to every subgroup. I gotta go to the original scholars or the head scholars of that movement to understand what they say. And then I can put the contemporary people in that context. Even though that movement is a contemporary movement, it still has primary scholars and resources that they take from as a general rule. Y'all follow me now? Is that, y'all following what I mean? Is that all clear? Abu Muhammad, you got it? So my first thing to do is to introduce you so that we can discuss this properly to these foremost primary famous figures in each of these schools so that we can have a base by which we build. So for instance, I already told you about Imam al-Ash'ari, Imam al-Maturidi, Imam al-Tahawi, right? From one side. Then that's from the whom the Ash'aris and Maturidis, they look towards them as prominent scholars and authorities within the school. When they want to talk about Aqidah, these are their resources. They talk about these early scholars. They mention them as authorities. Then when I talked about As-Salafiyya and those who claim to follow that way, or Al-Wahhabiyya, which I know them as, right? When they talk about Aqidah, I mention their famous scholars that they would mention, like Al-Barbahari, like Ibn Taymiyyah, like Ibn al-Qayyim, right? Or Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya. That's why I mentioned that, right? And when they refer to Al-Tahawi, that's why I put him in the middle, they refer to Tahawi with their understanding of his convictions, right? So when they explain Al-Tahawiyya, you're going to find that it's going to be explained differently from the scholars of the Ash'ari or Maturidi madhab. But they're going to explain the same book. So they are going to say, we follow the Aqidah of Imam al-Tahawi. They say we all study Al-Aqidah al-Tahawiyya, right? But when they explain, it's going to be completely different in some matters, right? All right. So if you don't know this, you're going to think, as long as any book I follow, I read Al-Aqidah Tahawiyya, any commentary, then this is the correct thing. If you don't realize that this differences exist, you're going to fall into error because no one told you, right? So for instance, we studied Al-Aqidah Tahawiyya with the commentary of who? That's a question. What commentary did we study? Who was it written by? The commentary we studied. We finished. So I'm making sure we're following. Which commentary, whose commentary did we study? Al-Ghaznawi, right? And Mary, good answer. In what century did Imam Al-Ghaznawi live? What century? Islamic Hijri century. So that is Isa. He lived in the 8th century, right? And globally, where was he located? 8th century, that's right. And globally, where was he located? Because that's historically 8th century. Globally, where was he located? All right, right. So Egypt, India, then Egypt. So we got a context. Now, I just want to add, I'm going to read some biographies because that's why I told everyone should have a Reliance of the Traveler, especially for the biographical notes, right? They're extremely important. That's why we're studying this Reliance of the Traveler, so you get familiar with the scholars. Then it broadens our conversation. So we're going to stop at the 8th century for right now. Up into the 8th century, we mentioned what Al-Ghaznawi mentioned, and we got Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim. In terms of Al-Tahawi, the basis for the Wahhabi Salafi school, right? when they explain the Creed of Al-Tahawi, the basis is Shar al-Aqidah al-Tahawiyya by Ibn al-Iz al-Hanafi, right? Who died 792 AH, right? So whenever the Wahhabiyya or as-Salafiyya, and I want to clarify something. Let me finish this, right? Whenever they want to explain the Creed of Al-Tahawi, Imam Abu Ja'far Al-Tahawi, their foremost reference in explaining it is this explanation written by this man, Ibn al-Iz al-Hanafi. Or you can put Ibn Abi al-Iz al-Hanafi, right? Ibn Abi al-Iz al-Hanafi or Ibn al-Iz al-Hanafi, both he's known by, right? So you can say Ibn Abi al-Iz, al-Iz, both names he's known by, right? So whenever you want it, when they talk about it, that's their foremost references. Whenever they talk about Aqidah Tahawiyah, that's the book they refer to, right? Right? He was a student close to Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah, right? And his explanation of the creed is according to the school of Ibn Taymiyyah, or the convictions of Ibn Taymiyyah, right? And Ibn Qayyim, which we read about them. So that's a figure that you need to know. Every book of the Salafi contemporary scholars, most of them have died now, right? Some of them are still alive, is based on this book. So this is the book, right? Shar Aqidah Tahawiyah, right? By Ibn al-Iz al-Hanafi, Ibn Abi al-Iz al-Hanafi, right? This, and he was from Damascus, Syria, right? Every book that they write contemporary is built upon that book. So for instance, Bin Baz, his explanation, his notes, he has footnotes of the Aqidah Tahawiyah is based on Ibn Abi al-Iz's commentary. Al-Albany, who explained, is based on that as well. Al-Albany, he made notes and it's based on that, right? His explanation and notes is based on that book. Ibn Uthaymeen, he has one, and also Fawzan, Salih Fawzan. He actually explained the creed of Al-Tahawiyah, but his creed, his explanation is also based on Ibn Abi al-Iz, right? Is everybody clear with me? Everyone follow all that? Step by step. Everybody with me or no? Okay. Tell you. So now, when we discuss the Creed of Al-Tahawiyya, right? Al-Aqidah al-Tahawiyya, our main reference, if we want to know the position of the Al-Wahhabiyya or Salafiyya, we can have recourse to Ibn Abi al-Iz, his commentary. If we want to know, to ensure that all of their top scholars, like Bin Baz, like Ibn Uthaymeen, like Al-Albany, like Fawzan, we're going to their books to see what they said in addition or in contradiction to what Ibn Abi al-Iz said. That's it. So everyone else is irrelevant in the discussion. So we don't need to talk about any contemporary imam or sheikh. We don't really need, we know the position by what their scholars mentioned in their books, right? And anything else is them explaining what they understood from the books. That's it. That's all they're doing. Now, do you understand when I say everyone that comes after is only transmitting from others? The same applies to Asharis and Maturidis. There are main explanations of the Creed of Al-Tahawiyya written by famous Ashari or Maturidi scholars like Al-Ghaznawi, among those early scholars, right? Like Al-Maydani and others, right? Which we'll talk about later, because we read a Maturidi explanation, so we have one in front of us. And that was at the same time of Ibn Abi Iz. It was in the 8th century. Now, that we understand that that's going to be the basis by which we examine the Creed of Al-Tahawiyya on the second time, when we start to see the differences and understand the why, right? That's what we're talking about. And I'm going slow so that we make sure we're following and we can articulate what was said. What I want to do today quickly, we only have 25 minutes left, so I need you to take all those notes. So add, after Ibn Qayyim, al-Jawziyah, add Ibn Abi al-Iz al-Hanafi. And you just put commentator on the Creed of Al-Tahawiyya. Put him on the side of Al-Wahhabiyya, who say they are a Salafiyya. A side note, there is a contemporary group among the Asharis, right, who think their way of thinking is the only one to think, and every other Ashari is a deviant. We have that in the Asharis too. Don't think that's just Salafis. We have among the Asharis those who think we're the only people that are on the truth. Every other Ashari or Maturidi is deviant. That's called lisan al-hal. They don't say that with their tongue. Their state says that. If you're not in my subgroup, you are a deviant, period. That exists. As it exists in the Salafi group. We have in the Salafi, you got a group of those who call themselves Salafi or the Wahhabiyya, and they think if you don't think like us, you're a deviant. That exists. So let's not make that the focal point of how we study, because it's just claims and it really doesn't matter. Do y'all understand that point? That exists and you're aware of it among both? Do y'all follow me? So you'll have somebody of that particular group, and I know who it is as soon as you start talking. I think they don't realize that. They think that as soon as you talk, anyone who knows know where you're talking from. Anyone who knows religion As soon as you open your mouth, they know where you're coming from, right? Or when you type. So for instance, you notice I say Al-Wahhabiyya, right? And I'll say they call themselves Salafiyya, right? Now the Salafi, who's a modern Salafi, won't accept that. But the real hardcore Wahhabi doesn't call himself a Salafi. He'll admit we are Al-Wahhabiyya, and Al-Wahhabiyya are correct. The Salafi guy who don't want to know that, who don't even know that they call themselves that, will say, we're not Wahhabi, that's slander. Nah, they call themselves that. It is in their books, you just don't know it. The followers of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab did not call themselves Salafiyya. They were known as Al-Wahhabiyya. You just don't know that. But you're reading the books, you just don't realize it. And that's fine, that's why we're talking about learning. No one even told you, right? So for us, it's education. It's not about, waving our pom-poms. It's about education. If you educate yourself and someone cares enough about you to teach you, you'll learn these things, right? But unfortunately for us, especially as Black people, people don't care about us. They just want to control us. They don't want to teach us. They want to make us their followers. And that's the end of it. Whether they are Salafi or Ash'ari, this has been the habit, or Maturidi, this has been a habit with us. Let's enslave those people mentally and make them push our agenda. And that doesn't work for us. It works for them, but it doesn't work for us. And I'm just being real. And for me, I'm saying let us learn so no one can do that to us, no matter who they are. We must learn enough that no one does that to us ever again, So for instance, there are among the Ash'aris who claim to be Ash'ari, if I say Salafiyya, they'll attack me. You hear, I don't think as a person you would meet among us that use the term Wahhabi much as me. Despite that, because I don't talk like you attack me. Don't call them Wahhabi, or don't call them Salafi. That's your opinion. They call themselves Salafi. I'm identifying who they are. That's it. Why do I got to talk like you? Why do I have to think like you? Is that a personal obligation on me to think like you or talk like you? No, it's not. And they would reach a level, because I said Salafi and not Wahhabi, that they would find a way to turn that into kufr. Let me show you how it works. Y'all ready for something ridiculous? You ready? Tell me you're ready. Sitting down? Here's how it works. Imam Amin called the Wahhabis who have kufr belief. This is their saying. I'm going to show you how they move. They claim to be Ash'aris. Imam Amin called the Wahhabis who have kufr belief Salafi. And what he meant by that is that they're following the way of the Salaf. And that belief that they have is kufr. So since he attribute that kufr belief to the Salaf by calling them Salafi, he's a kafir. Did you hear what I just said? Let me repeat that. Imam Amin called the Wahhabis who have kufr belief Salafi. And that means he thinks they're following the way of the Salaf. He didn't deny that. So he thinks that's the way of the Salaf. And he's attributing those kufr beliefs to the Salaf. And to attribute them with kufr, he's a kafir. Did you hear that? Did you follow the point? And that's what happens. To that extent, that's not an Ash'ari position. That's your group. No Ash'ari as an Ash'ari, globally and historically, talk like that. That's your group talking like that. This happens. See how it led? It's ridiculous. but they do that for everything. And what it ultimately boils down, if you don't follow my way, I'm going to excommunicate you. That's it. And I'll find a way to get there. Now, everyone who listens to me know that's ridiculous, but they'll do it. So my point is, don't pay them no attention, right? No attention whatsoever. And the same way you have that level of extremism, that same level of extremism you have among Al-Wahhabiyya. You got a group of them that say, here's how you're supposed to think. If you do anything opposite of this, you mean this. And because you mean this, you're a deviant or you're a kafir. The same concept. So it's an extreme over here and an extreme over here. And for us, that don't work for none of us. We need to find a middle ground. And once you understand this process, you'll see where we've been duped no matter where we go. And that's why we got to go beyond just the contemporary understanding of things. We have to, for our own safety. Tayyib. So with that said, I'm going to come on both ends and bring it down so that when I talk about the issue, you know all the players, and then you know who the main players are. I'm going to mention what they mentioned in their books, and therefore you're going to have the information to distinguish and understand what the truth is from your own evaluation and examination, and not just parrot things, right? We already went over what the creed of Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah is according to the Ash'aris and Maturidis. So that's clear. If you need to check out at that, check out. You got it. If you're not interested in learning the differences, then check out. Or you could just listen. But for the one who now needs, I got the belief, we went over it, 40-something classes, right? Now I want to understand the why. That's what we're talking about now, right? So from the Ash'aris and Maturidis, and remember when we say Ash'ari Maturidi, there's only minor differences, as the author mentioned, 6, 8, 9, 10 differences in terminology between the Ash'aris and Maturidis. So when we say Ash'ari, we mean Maturidi. When we say Maturidi, we mean Ash'ari, right? And when I say Salafiyya, I mean Wahhabiyya. When I mean Wahhabiyya, I mean Salafiyya. So you understand my terminology. You know what I'm saying. So if I use the word Salafi or Wahhabi, I'm saying the same thing. I'm not distinguishing anything different. I don't play those kind of games, right? So whenever I say Salafi, I'm talking about the Wahhabi. Whenever I'm talking about Wahhabi, I'm talking about the Salafi, right? Unless I specifically mention something different at the time I'm talking. So when I say Imam Al-Tahawi's creed is a Salafi creed, I'm not talking about the Wahhabiyya or the modern day Salafiyya. I'm talking about a Salaf, a Salih. So it's a distinction here. So you have to understand terminology. I'm not talking about, so when I say the creed of Imam Al-Tahawi is the Salafi creed, I'm talking about a Salaf as-Salih. I'm not talking about this modern day group called a Salafiyya. Y'all with me? Am I clear? I say clear because I can't see your faces. Y'all know that already. I want to make sure y'all following me. So it's kind of repetitive, but that's the problem with internet teaching. You don't see real people. All right. Now I want to go to the Reliance of the Traveler. We're back. And I want to read some quick biographies of some scholars that I want you to highlight. All right, who was number one reader that I put? Imam al-Bayhaqi, right?
Correct.
So if you go to page 1041, the first imam of the famous imams that I want you to memorize after Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, from our side of the Ash'ariyah and Maturidiyah, which we say we are Ahl Sunnah. Now, that's what we believe. The Salafiyah, Wahhabiyah, they say they're Ahl Sunnah too. So the term Ahl Sunnah is used by both. But you just need to distinguish what they mean by Ahl Sunnah and what we mean by Ahl Sunnah. There's a difference, right? For us, after those great Imams, those three Imams, Imam Al-Tahawi, Imam Al-Ash'ari, Imam Al-Maturidi, one of the most famous scholars that Ash'aris and Maturidis, right, refer to and his works in Aqidah is Imam Al-Bayhaqi. Imam Al-Bayhaqi, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And we're going to read his biography, X 103, on page 1041.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. The author, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him, said, Bayhaqi is Ahmed ibn al-Hussein ibn Ali Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, born in Kasrajan, a village around Bayhaq near Nishapur, Persia, in 384. A principal hadith master, Hafiz.
Excuse me, give me 1 second. Keep reading. I just got to grab something real quick. I forgot it.
A principal hadith master, Hafiz, and Shafi'i Imam, he was raised in Bayhaq, but traveled to gain sacred knowledge to Baghdad, Kufa, Mecca, and other cities. The hobby was to say of him, had Bayhaqi wanted to found his own school of jurisprudence and be its mujtahid, he would have been able to, because of the vast range of subjects of which he was a master, and his knowledge of scholarly differences. Bayhaqi's works amount to nearly 1,000 volumes, treating the sciences of hadith, Quranic exegesis, sacred law, tenets of faith, and other subjects. The Imam of the two sanctuaries, Juwayni, once observed, every Shafi'i scholar is indebted to Shafi'i except Bayhaqi, to whom Shafi'i is indebted for his writing so many works strengthening the school, expanding questions on which the Imam had been brief, and supporting his positions. He died in Nishapur in 458.
So Imam al-Bayhaqi, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who died 458. So he was in the 5th century. He's after Imam al-Ash'ari, Imam al-Tahawi, Imam al-Maturidi. The main work which we use as Ahl Sunnah is his book Al-Asma wa Sifat, written by al-Bayhaqi, the book of names and attributes. And al-Bayhaqi wrote this book, and he discussed almost all of the issues that we differ in, right? And he was early, 458. He was the student of Imam al-Hakim. Al-Hakim, who is the famous hadith scholar who wrote the book Al-Mustadrak ala Sahihain. And Al-Hakim studied all those great scholars. So his book is a famous book in hadith. So when we're talking about the people of hadith, al-Bayhaqi in his time was among the foremost scholars of hadith. His books in hadith are well known and very famous. And his teachers were teachers of hadith. But he wrote in Aqidah as well. And his book, Al-Asma wa Sifat, is a major reference when we're talking about these issues. He has another book which is called Al-I'tiqad by al-Bayhaqi, right? In which he discusses a little bit more condensed, than Al-Asma wa Sifat. So when you study this, al-Bayhaqi was Ash'ari. So when he talks, you're going to understand the positions in relating to Allah's attributes according to this great hadith scholar who was Ash'ari, right? And nobody will study Islam in a scholarly way except that they will refer to the works of al-Bayhaqi. No Salafi, Wahhabi, no Sunni, Ash'ari or Maturidi. Anyone who's a serious student will refer to the works of al-Bayhaqi. If you're serious, if you're really studying, if you're just talking, that's another story. But if you're a student of knowledge, you must read the books of Al-Bayhaqi. You can't do without them. Not if you're seriously studying. If you leave his books off, then you haven't studied. You're talking. You haven't studied, right? And this is something you should record because it's extremely important that you understand this stuff, right? It's very important. So because we hear a lot of time, especially among our brothers and sisters who follow the way of the Salafiyah, they say the scholars, and they only mention contemporary scholars or Ibn Taymiyyah. They don't know other scholars, not from the Salaf or those who were right next to the Salaf. They don't know that stuff. And I don't blame them. They weren't taught. So I'm giving you information, right? That your scholars themselves refer to these books. By the way, this Asma wa Sifat, and I'm going to teach you this, was published by the Salafis, by Al-Wahhabiyah. And in the book, you'll notice I got all these notes. This is all the stuff we're going to be talking about, right? All these notes. You see those things. You see a lot. Even at the top, right? These are all points about the attributes of Allah, which some of us are saying literal and this and that, exactly from Al-Bayhaqi. I'm going to, because this is the people of Hadith, and they were early, I'm going to mention what he said. And one thing about this, he quotes directly with an unbroken chain to the Salaf. Every hadith he mentions with a chain of narration. So it's very important, and it's written in a style that most of our brothers and sisters are totally unaware of. So that's going to be a reference point. So that's Al-Bayhaqi. The next scholar we're going to mention, Al-Bayhaqi, was Imam Al-Juwayni. Go ahead.
The Imam of the two sanctuaries, Juwayni, is Abdullah Malik ibn Abdullah ibn Yusuf ibn Muhammad Abu al-Ma'ali Rukanuddin Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, a scholar and tenets of faith.
You keep the name Imam al-Haramain, the Imam of the two sanctuaries. He's famous by that. So if you can't remember Juwayni, you just say Imam al-Haramain, and everyone knows that's al-Juwayni.
A scholar and tenets of faith and the Imam of the Shafi'i school of his time, originally from Juwain in present-day Afghanistan, born in 419. He was educated by his father, and after his death read his father's entire library and then took his place as teacher at Nishapur, though he was later forced to travel to Baghdad because of trouble between the Ash'aris, Mu'tazilites, and Shiites. After meeting the greatest scholars of Baghdad, he went on to Mecca, living in the sacred precinct for 4 years, after which he moved to Medina and taught and gave formal legal opinion, fatwa, gaining his nickname, the Imam of the two sanctuaries, i.e. of Mecca and Medina. At length he returned to Persia, where the vizier Nizam al-Mulk, having built a first Nizamiya academy in Baghdad for Abu Ishaq Shirazi to teach in, built a second one for al-Juwayni at Nishapur. It was here the Imam wrote in earnest, completing his 15-volume Nihaya al-Matlab of Diraya al-Madhab, the utmost of what is sought on understanding the evidence of the Shafi'i school, which no one in the field of Islamic law had ever produced the like of, as well as other works in tenets of faith, Ash'ari theology, fundamentals of Islamic legal methodology, and Shafi'i law.
What he's famous for is writing books in Aqidah, books in Ilm al-Kalam, right? Books in Usul al-Fiqh, and books in Shafi'i Fiqh, right? Go ahead.
Among his greatest legacies to Islam and the Muslims was his pupil Ghazali, who is said to have surpassed even the Imam at the end of his life. He died in Nishapur in 478.
So the greatest student of Imam al-Juwayni who became famous was Imam al-Ghazali. He was the sheikh of Imam al-Ghazali. As I told you about al-Bayhaqi, no Sunni Muslim who claims to be Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah, right, except if he studies usul al-fiqh. You know usul al-fiqh, the fundamentals of fiqh. One of the foremost references or books that are studied in anybody who studies usul al-fiqh is the book Al-Waraqat by Al-Juwayni, right? So if you got a real Salafi student, he's going to have the book Al-Waraqat by Al-Juwayni. Al-Juwayni was an Ash'ari scholar who wrote an Ash'ari creed and a Shafi'i scholar. So if they're studying fiqh, they're going to understand the works of Al-Juwayni and his contribution to the school. For us, his works in Aqidah are significant. Among them, his book Al-Irshad. And I didn't bring all these books, so I don't have books all over the place. The same books, we're going to be referring to all these things when we talk. So from Al-Juwayni, we got him as a famous scholar. He died after Al-Bayhaqi in the year 478. Next, let's move to Al-Ghazali. On page 1047. Al-Ghazali, who was the famous, everyone knows Imam Al-Ghazali. When we talk about our code 3453, the code number 4 is in reference to the book Ihya Ulumuddin, Revival of the Religious Sciences, written by Imam Al-Ghazali. So we talk about Al-Ghazali, and we're studying his book Minhaj al-Abidin. We finished Bidayatul Hidayah. We read Arba'in al-Asl, which was the book of Imam Al-Ghazali. All of those are Imam Al-Ghazali's works, which we read. And on Monday, we're doing the Muqtasar of Ihya. We were doing. So, all of these are the works of Al-Ghazali, well known among us, inshallah. Go ahead.
Imam Ghazali is Muhammad ibn Ahmed Abu Hamid Hujat al-Islam al-Ghazali al-Tusi, the Shafi'i Imam, proof of Islam, and Sufi adept born in Tabaran, near Tus, just north of present-day Mashhad, Iran, in 450. The Imam of his time, nicknamed Shafi'i II for his legal virtuosity, he was a brilliant intellectual who first studied jurisprudence at Tus and then traveled the Islamic world to Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo, Alexandria, Mecca, and Medina, taking sacred knowledge from its masters, among them the Imam of the two sanctuaries, Juwayni, with whom he studied until the Imam's death, becoming at his hands a scholar in Shafi'i law, logic, tenets of faith, debate, and in the rationalistic doctrines of the philosophical schools of his time, which he was later called upon to refute. When Juwayni died, Al-Ghazali debated the Imams and scholars of Baghdad in the presence of the Vizier Nizam al-Mulk, who was so impressed that he appointed him to a teaching post at the Nizamiya Academy in Baghdad, where word of his brilliance spread and scholars journeyed to hear him.
So you got to understand, in the 5th century, beginning of the 6th century, really in the 5th century, towards the end of the 5th century, Imam Al-Ghazali was among the foremost scholars in the Islamic world. When you wanted to talk about in the 5th century, in the world, Imam Al-Ghazali was at the head of the scholars. No doubt about that. Imam Al-Ghazali was Ash'ari, just like his sheikh, Imam Al-Juwayni, right? Who was in Mecca and Medina, known as Imam al-Haramain, the Imam of the two. Imam al-Ghazali was known as Hujjatul Islam, the proof of Islam. These are the foremost scholars of their time, way before any of us. And they wrote in Aqidah, in belief. They mentioned their creeds and what they believe. It's in their books. It's documented, right? So when we say what was their beliefs, and all of them were scholars and famous scholars in their time, historically, globally. So when we talk about them, we're talking about major scholars. Go ahead.
His worldly success was something of a mixed blessing, and in mid-career, after considerable reflection, he was gripped by an intense fear for his soul and his fate in the afterlife, and he resigned from his post, traveling first to Jerusalem and then to Damascus to purify his heart by following the way of Sufism. In Damascus, he lived in seclusion for some 10 years, engaged in spiritual struggle and the remembrance of Allah Ta'ala, at the end of which he emerged to produce his masterpiece, Iyah Ulumuddin, giving life to the religious sciences, a classic among the books of the Muslims about internalizing God-fearingness, taqwa, in one's dealings with Allah Ta'ala, illuminating the soul through obedience to him, and the levels of believers' attainments therein.
And we
The work
remember the Ihya is divided into 4 quarters: ربع العبادات, ربع العادات, ربع المهلكات, and ربع المنجيات. That you have the quarter of acts of worship, the quarter of customary practices, the quarter of ruinous traits and characteristics, and the quarter of saving traits and characteristics. And that makes up the subject matter of Al-Ihya. Now,
The work shows how deeply Ghazali personally realized what he wrote about, and his masterly treatment of hundreds of questions dealing with the inner life that no one had previously discussed or solved is a performance of sustained excellence that shows its author's well-disciplined legal intellect and profound appreciation of human psychology. He also wrote nearly 200 other works on the theory of government, sacred law, refutations of philosophers, tenets of faith, Sufism, Quranic exegesis, scholastic theology, and basis of Islamic jurisprudence. He died in Tabriz in 505.
here, when they mention tenets of faith and scholastic theology, tenets of faith, usul al-din, al-aqidah, that's in general. Scholastic theology is ilm al-kalam, that's detailed. It's the same subject matter, but one in more details with supplying intellectual evidence for textual statements. That's the difference between the two. One is just going into the subject matter with much more detail with the intent of clarifying bad convictions related to tenets of faith. That's called ilm al-kalam. Let's get one more. I think we got time. So we got Imam al-Ghazali. A little bit before Imam al-Ghazali, and he mentioned that Imam al-Ghazali was following the way of Tasawwuf. One of the main books in the area of basic texts and the foundations of Tasawwuf, but also it contains the belief of the Sufis, is a book written by the great Imam Abul Qasim al-Kushairi. Hold on one second. I'm sorry, my library is downstairs and I'm upstairs, and I wanted to. So this is Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin, right? And this is the first section where he deals with ibadat, which in this section he deals with al-aqidah. So the second book in the Ihya after the book of knowledge is Allahumma salli ala is the book after the Ihya. The second book is called Kitab Qawaidul Aqaid, the book of the principles of tenets of faith. So after he does the first is the book of knowledge, then he talks about Aqidah right after that. What is the belief? And this is Imam al-Ghazali, right? And this book deals with Aqidah. So if you want to know what was the belief of Imam al-Ghazali, and that's in the 5th century and the beginning of the 6th century, from the great scholar, his book Ihya the second chapter of Rubul Ibadat, the second book in Rubul Ibadat. There's 10 books there. The second book, Kitab Qawaidul Aqaid, which people have wrote as a separate book too. It deals with just the creed, right? As for Imam al-Kushairi, which you read, right? You read Kushairi, right?
Yes.
Imam al-Kushairi, his book, Al-Risalatul Kushairiyah, right? In this book, the first section,
Excuse me, we didn't read him yet. We need to read him last.
Okay. We read Al-Ghazali, right? Let's go to Imam al-Kushairi, which is page 1031, and we'll stop there. You with me?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
Abu Qasim Kushairi.
That's X53 on page 1031.
Abu Qasim Kushairi is Abdul Karim ibn Hazawin ibn Abdul Malik Abu al-Qasim al-Kushairi, born in Khurashan in 376. He was a Shafi scholar, Quranic exegete, and Sufi master who lived in Nishapur and authored several works, of which his Al-Risala al-Kushairiyah, the Kushairi letter, is perhaps the most famous. He died in Nishapur in 465.
So he was before Imam al-Ghazali. His book, Al-Risalatul Kushairiyah, the first section after his introduction is this section. The first thing he discusses, and there it is, right? في بيان اتقاد هذه الطائفة في مسائل الأصول, right? He says, this is an explanation of the creeds or the creed or the belief of this group, which is the Sufis. هذه الطائفة, meaning الطائفة, meaning the Sufis. في مسائل الأصول, in the cases related to the fundamentals of belief. So the first thing he talks, before he talks about tasawwuf, he talks about al-aqidah. What is the belief of the Sufis, right? So this is an early book, a great scholar. And what does he talk about? He talks about first, before anything, after the introduction, this is what the Sufis believe. So when I want to talk about Sufis, don't tell me what so-and-so said. Go to the masters among them. Go to the great scholars. What did they say they believe? Here, Imam al-Kushairi mentions in his Risala what is the belief of the Sufis. And he considered the Sufis to be from Ahl-Sunnati wal Jama'ah. And all of them, they were connected in their chains of narration. Al-Bayhaqi, Al-Hakim, Al-Kushairi, all of them were Ash'ariyah. Every single one of them. They were all Ash'aris, right? So if we want to know, is this belief of the Ash'aris consistent? We can look at all of these main references, and then we can deduce, is this creed consistent with the Ash'ari creed, or what? Invalid, away from the Ash'ari creed. The scholars are well known, the books are available, and the same case if we talk about the Wahhabi or Salafi creed, the same thing. So we have an ability, if we study, to research and come to a sound understanding of the differences and why they differ, and then decide which one we accept and believe. That's going to be my objective up to Ramadan. So every morning, I'm going to hit it from all these different points to make, because in Ramadan, we're going to stop. Ramadan's the month of trying to get us inside together. So I'm not going to spend time talking about this issue during Ramadan. We're going to be doing other things, as we mentioned. Then after Ramadan, we can continue our studies in this field, but during Ramadan, because I said we're going to take a year to go over all this stuff, and because it's a lot. But for Ramadan, I'm not going to do that. I need to get myself together as well. So I need a certain mindset. I need. So with that, we'll stop there and until tomorrow, inshallah ta'ala. So we're finished. We're not going to do any more reading. If anyone has any questions, I'll open up for what we talked about. Please don't take me off of what we're talking about. If you don't understand something I said or you need further clarification, ask about that. If you want to debate and show me your opinion, save that for another time because I'm not right at this moment. I'm trying to focus on what we're talking about, right? But if you need clarification or if some additional information you need, I can help you, I'll give it to you. So I'll give you the opportunity, inshallah, to ask whatever you need to ask about what I said, inshallah. So if anyone needs to go, I'm done with the text. All I'm doing is answering questions. We're good? No questions? Or should I wait? Is there any questions that I missed that came up earlier? Except Imam of the Boom Bap. They're not questions, they're statements. Imam of the Boom Bap is making a statement in the form of a question. What page is Imam Juwaini on? Imam Juwaini. What page is Imam Juwaini on?
1065.
1065. What's the biographical note? Oh, X212.
212.
I didn't get a chance to hear an answer yesterday, but I asked if Ibn Kathir Tafsir of Quran is good reference book. In general, it is a good reference book. It has some errors in it that one needs to be aware of. But in areas of Aqidah, you won't find the things that Ibn Taymiyyah and them said in Ibn Kathir. However, there are some mistakes in there that need to be corrected. Offhand, I don't remember all of them. They're marked in my tafsir of Ibn Kathir, but I don't have it with me right now. So I don't remember exactly every single point because there's not a whole lot. There are some areas. But the English translation you have is not the complete tafsir of Ibn Kathir. It is an edited version by the Wahhabi Salafis. It's edited. It's not what he put in his book. So the English, that big 10 volumes or whatever you got, that English translation is not the complete translation of Ibn Kathir. It is missing a lot of things. Important things are missing. So the translation you got in English, I don't say you can count on everything in it without someone reading it with you and showing you where they put their stuff in it. Because one of the things that the Salafis do, when they do books, they put their own comments in the book. And if you're not a good reader, you're not going to be distinguishing between what they added and what is the original book. That's why you notice when I'm reading English books, as you see, I always have the Arabic book in front of me to make sure that the translation is consistent with the original text. That's why I do that, right? It's because sometimes they leave stuff out, sometimes they add stuff, and when you do that, sometimes it changes the meaning or alters the meaning, right? Sometimes it's just complete fabrication, but that's a whole nother story. So whenever you're reading the books printed by them, there is the degree of honesty that's missing. And you won't never know that until you are able to have the original text and compare the translation to the original text. When you do that, you're able to see where they're adding and taking out. But that's why you should read with teachers anyway, right? That's why we say the person who doesn't have a teacher and doesn't have a sheikh to guide them, their mistakes are going to be plenty because they don't have nothing to check it with. And Allah knows best. So in general, it's good, but there are areas that you need to be aware of. And you'll learn them from learning. Was Ibn Kathir a man of tasawwuf? All of them were Sufis. Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, Ibn Qayyim, Ibn Kathir. Sufism was well known. what Ibn Taymiyyah and them denied what they considered excesses in Tasawwuf, not Tasawwuf itself. They were not opposed to Sufism. They were opposed to what they considered excessive practices in Tasawwuf, not Tasawwuf itself. So they were all Sufis, so that's not an issue. And Ibn Taymiyyah, he has a book of a compendium of Fatawa. He has a whole book dedicated to Tasawwuf. And he clearly mentions that the good Sufis to what he considered bad Sufis. So the issue is not Tasawwuf, is how he understood certain practices. Risalatul Qushayriya. You can get it from, I don't know. I don't know. You have to look. It's translated in English too, as the epistle of Imam al-Qushayri. You just have to look. The best print, if I was get this to you, if you read Arabic, the best print that I know of is this one, Darul Minhaj. It's very nice. And the scholar who did the editing is very precise, very precise. So if you get a copy of Risal al-Qushayriya, this is the best one to have, Darul Minhaj. There's the other question. Hold on one second. I don't know if you're ahead. Was Ibn Kathir Ahl Sunnah? In general, yes, he was Ahl Sunnah. And they added their beliefs. They weren't the beliefs of Ibn Kathir himself. Ibn Kathir didn't have the exact same beliefs of Ibn Taymiyyah. He didn't at all. And all you got to do is read his tafsir and you'll see that. The Maturidi scholars like Imam al-Nasafi, which you just studied, Imam Umar al-Nasafi Najmuddin, he was Maturidi, right? And all of them were of that al-Ghunaymi, all of those were Maturidi. But Maturidi and Ash'ari, when you say it's the same thing. Ash'ari study Maturidi stuff, Maturidi study Ash'ari stuff, is the same thing. I mean, they got many book companies. One of the main book companies is Darus Salam. For us, I don't believe just getting rid of books. I don't subscribe to that. I say you need all the books that you could so you know what you're doing. Now, I don't say everybody got to do that. And that's what Imam Asim was mentioned. If we followed Imams and Jama'ah and we study, it would be sufficient for one or two of us to have those books. We have classes, we see the books, everyone knows what's in them, and we clear from that. It's not necessary for everyone to go buy a big old library. If we got a library in the masjid, we got a community, we have the different stuff, we want to research, that's sufficient for enough. All this independent me stuff is killing us as a community, as a nation, as people. So I don't agree, throw a bunch of books away. And then now you can't, because if I talk, they're going to say what you said. But as you see that I have the books, I have the references, so you're going to know I'm not fabricating because I can show you, right? So I think that is needed, right? If I told you that Ibn Uthaymin compared Allah to the moon in his description, you would think I'm crazy, right? How many would you believe that I said Ibn Uthaymin, when he was describing Allah's istiwa or Allah being fis sama, when he made a comparison, an analogy between the moon and Allah? How many of you would believe that? Ibn Uthaymeen. He made a comparison between Allah, when he was talking about Allah being fis sama, and ma'ana, and with the creation at the same time, ma'a khalq, right? He made the analogy of the moon. How many would you believe that? I mean, normally, if I didn't just tell you and you trust me, but if you didn't trust me and I told you when he was talking about Allah being fis sama, which he may say above the heaven, in the heaven, however you want to translate it, they say above the heaven, let's say, right? Wa ma'al khalq, and with the creation, he used the analogy of the moon and the earth, in the creation. Would you normally believe that? In this book, Sharh al-Aqidat al-Wasatiyah, is by Muhammad ibn Saleh al-Uthaymeen, right? I'll show it to you tomorrow. I gotta find it. There you go. Subhanallah. Here, right here. I mean, it's Arabic. I got to translate it for you, but I just want you to see it. Right? He gives a similitude right here. Right? This is Ibn Uthaymeen. To make us understand the meaning. Right? And he says this is to validate that a thing can be with a human being in reality and also to be distant between them, right? This is like the moon, which is the smallest of the creation. It is in the heaven and with the traveler and other than him wherever they go. A'udhu billah. Did you see that? I just translated it for you so you can see that he's talking about Allah being in the heaven or above the heaven and with us. And the example he gave to show us how that's possible is like the moon. It is the smallest of the creation. It is in the heaven and with the traveler wherever he goes. Right there. On page, what's that? 299 of the explanation of Al-Aqidatu Wasatiyya by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. I'm making this stuff up. You cannot make it up. Like, this is what they say. So, if I want to understand that Allah is above the heaven and with us, all I got to do is consider the moon. To make me understand, if I look at the moon, it's in the heavens, but it's with the traveler, and then I say that that can make me understand Allah being in the heaven and with us. A'udhu billah. I just want you to, this stuff you can't make up. When Allah said, Laysa kamithlihi shay, that's no way to make an example. The moon is a body in heaven. It has a form, a shape, it emanates light, and the Musafir is on the earth. There's a distance between them. They both exist in a place. They're both bodies. That is no comparison, no similitude, no analogy that should be applied to the creator of all the creations. But they say this is the Aqidah of the Salaf. I want you to show me one person in the Salaf, among the Salaf, find one scholar among the followers of the followers, among the followers, among the Sahaba that made such a comparison or an analogy or similitude for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And here's the book. I didn't publish it. This is their publishment. This is their book. This is their scholars. This is just an example. So when I'm making it up, that's why you need the books. Now, that's why you need the books. Don't throw those books away, because if I didn't show you that, you would think I made it up. He didn't say that. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. That's why I don't rush to throw books away. But it's sufficient. One of us got it and we can see the book. That's sufficient. We don't need to buy 10 copies, right? But do y'all see why I'm saying that? Nah, this thing ain't like we think. It's much more to it. Imam, what if they counted by saying, what about with certain Ash'ari scholars in our time have said understanding the kalam of Allah in terms of the Quran is like seeing the moon on a lake. It's not the actual moon, just the Quran when we recite. It isn't how Allah's speech actually sounds. So they're saying using, and that's wrong. They shouldn't do that. Because any Ash'ari would tell you that such an analogy about the kalam of Allah and to be is not valid. To say it's like the moon on a lake, it's not valid. Not at all. It's a horrible analogy. And it's easier, and I'm not saying what they intended to do. I'm not saying what Ibn Uthaymeen intended to do. This horrible analogy. Whether you might not be trying to liken Allah to creation, but you see what happens when you do stuff like that? Then you get some young person who don't know, and he starts comparing Allah's hand to the hand of a door or to the hand on the clock because of these false analogies, which is leading to tashbih, likening Allah to his creation. So I think you got the point. May Allah make it easy for us. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. We'll inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. The 10 o'clock class for Sheikh Waleed has been canceled. I forgot to mention it to him because I didn't schedule those classes, so it's my fault. The morning classes I didn't schedule either. I only scheduled this class and the night class because Ramadan is getting close, and we were talking about what we're going to do to Ramadan, and I actually got ahead of myself. So please forgive me, overlook my shortcomings in that. But inshallah, we'll be doing that process to after Ramadan, because Ramadan's coming and we both need to prepare for Ramadan. So we're going to do that one class at night, but the class that was earlier today is going to be canceled, that we were doing Nujumul Lamia. So that is going to be a canceled class. But tonight today's Wednesday, so I think it's at 7 tonight. I got to check. It may be 7 o'clock, not 8 o'clock. I don't remember well. But please forgive me. I got so much stuff on my mind. I'm all over the place, right? But I got to talk to Sheikh Waleed. But I know for sure that the 10 o'clock class wasn't scheduled. So we'll go to the 7 o'clock class tonight. Is the class at 7 for Sheikh Waleed tonight, or 8? 7? So yeah, it won't be a 10 o'clock class today. We're going to schedule the 7 o'clock class. But the 10 o'clock is not from Sheikh's side, it's from my side. I forgot to mention it and schedule it. So please overlook my shortcomings. So it's going to be tonight at 7 o'clock. And he'll start talking about, I believe, the rules of Ramadan, because we finished a Nasafiyah and he's getting ready to go into Ramadan. So I think that's what he's going to be talking about. But so be patient with me. I have to find out, because I'm scrambled eggs for brains. So that means don't get too busy. You're going to make a lot of errors if you get too busy. So one of my teachers told me, he said, I'm telling you, keep your strings short. I didn't understand what he meant by that, which means don't stretch yourself too much. So everyone's pulling you from every side. You're going to make a lot of errors. And I didn't listen. So I got all these strings and everyone's pulling me from every direction, all over the place, because I don't know how to say no, right? So since I don't say no, I say yes to stuff that I can't do. So it's my problem. Please overlook me. So if I told you yes to something and I fall short, please don't charge it to my heart. Charge it to my sense of lack of order. And may Allah pray for me that Allah make me better. Because I know a lot of you saying, you promised me to, you promised me to, you promised me. I'm sorry. I really want to, but when I got all these things pulling, I make mistakes. So I need to say no. One of the things I did to do that is I don't answer my phone. Right? So that way you can't just get to me so easily. Because if you get to me, I'm going to say yes. So may Allah overlook us all and make us better and allow us to apply what we know. Barakallahu fikum wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.